So, thinking about a story. This is kind of what got me started to do BeamG, like when I was thinking about writing a novel. I wanted to write a novel, and I realized that there wasn't like a tool online to help me to figure out like how to actually write a novel, to plan a novel. And eventually, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, and I hit on this idea, and we founded BeamG because of this idea of a planning tool, and a web-based online planning tool for novels. And actually, this novel that I still haven't written it yet because I got so busy doing BeamG and sorting out the company and making this whole thing work that I still haven't actually written the novel that I wanted to write with the tool that I kind of invented. But yeah, getting back to the story, thinking about a story. What it occurred to me that more or less every story is somehow a kind of a fish out of water story. It's always about taking someone into somewhere where they haven't been before. Not necessarily like a physical journey, it could be a spiritual journey, some kind of metaphorical journey, but it's always about confronting someone with something new to them. So basically, when you're thinking about a story, especially at the beginning stages as an author, even if you're not like a planner, even if you don't outline it beforehand, you do kind of need to know, well, who's the fish? Yeah, and what's the water? What is the ordinary world that this protagonist is living in? And of course, then what is outside of the bowl? What is this other world that this character is going to be confronted with? Looking at it another way, you could think of it as in these terms, that you have a protagonist or a character who's in an ordinary world, in a comfort zone, yeah, but the story has to drive them out of this comfort zone, obviously. So he drives them first into a kind of a learning zone, yeah, into something where they're in an environment which is new to them, but also something that I notice also when I'm working with authors, especially kind of beginning authors, is that people are often a bit shy of really making their characters suffer. Because what you really want to do, what makes a story really exciting, is when you bring your characters into the panic zone, to bring them to the edge of what they can bear. Because this is kind of what really brings out what you need in the story, like the change factor, what makes them change, so that the character has changed from the beginning of the story towards the end of the story. This is a different person. They've learned something. It's all about this learning experience. Now, this is real ways of thinking about story when you're planning a story. This is an image, this another aspect or another way of thinking about stories that you've probably heard of before, that you've seen before, the idea of plot points and pinch points. I'm not going to talk about that here, but I'm sure you've got other sessions that cover this kind of narrative structure. Now, all of these things that I've mentioned so far, if you're thinking about the fish out of water, if you're thinking about the comfort zone and the panic zone, or you're thinking about narrative structure in terms of act structure and midpoint and plot points and pinch points, there's one kind of problem that I noticed that you kind of run into when you think about stories, when you're planning stories in this way. And that is that you're focusing, I think, too much on the character or on the protagonist. And it's quite easy to forget that there are other factors or other people involved who are perhaps even more important than the character of the story. And what I'm talking about is the reader and you the author. You, the author, what I mean with that is the friend of mine who's also one of the co-founders, Amos, he's a great believer in this. Like the really important factor in the story is you, the author, in the sense that you are the one who is changing. Why is it that you feel the need to tell this story? That there's something transformational about the process of writing this book, about this novel, telling this story. So it's really a lot about you. Another really important factor that I like to concentrate on is the reader's journey, how does the reader change? That really the most important thing as an author is to make your reader feel, and to give them an experience which ideally, perhaps in some small way, changes them. as a person. So when you're thinking about these ways of grappling with story and story structure, I think it's really important that you always bear in mind that it's not just about plot points and midpoints and pinch points. If it is, then the point is, what do these do with the reader? How do they affect the reader emotionally? So getting nearer to the tool now, and I'll jump into the tool in a moment, we focus in BeamG, like not on the writing. As you've gathered from what I've been talking about, what we're doing is looking at the story development process, about turning an idea into a narrative. And we focus, therefore, not on language or style. And we don't even really have like a writing tool properly. Like, it's not like Scrivener. It's about story development. So basically, in the main areas in it, the character area and the plot area, because these are the two aspects that make the story. And what the characters do, what they decide, that makes the plot of the story. So starting with the characters, well, you've probably heard of this idea that characters have wants and needs. Yeah, you've probably, this is probably not news to you that there's a distinction between like a character want and a character need. But what that actually entails, we noticed, is that the wants, they relate directly to the plot, whereas the needs relate to the character, relate to the character development or the character like transformation, which means basically that there are a lot of sort of sub-questions or a lot of different ways of looking at this more in detail. Like there are different types of wants. There's a kind of inherent character wish, which was there in this character right from the very beginning, which is distinct from perhaps the want which is created by the beginning of the story, after kind of an inciting incident. There's a distinction between the goal which a character thinks they need to reach in order to achieve what they want. And there may be like a mission which is, again, something slightly distinct on the actions they take as a reaction to the mission that they're given. So you can look in all of these aspects, and they all pay into the plot, because they all pay into like these moments you have where the reader has to learn these aspects, these attributes of the character, and these what they then do, what they want, what drives them, what motivates them, needs to be clear to the reader, and obviously then creates the events of the plot, which is different to the needs, in the sense that the needs have to do with the flaw, the fatal flaw, the problem, the inner problem that the character has, which possibly, or you as an author, you need to know this, does the character already know what their inner flaw is, what their inner problem is? Or is there a moment when they recognize it? And when they recognize it, that doesn't really mean that they're ready to act on it. Is there a revelation moment for them when they learn what they really need in order to become like perhaps a better person? Or is there a choice moment? Is there a scene in which it is demonstrated that they have had this revelation and learned something because of it? And then this change moment, the scene that shows how the change has actually taken place. And when you look at these things, then you notice also like an effect of symmetry. The change moment relates more or less sort of symmetrically to a scene near the beginning, which shows what the inner problem of this character is. So basically, when you're looking at wants and needs, it's not deep enough for us, and the tool you dive much, much deeper into aspects like this. When it comes to character development, you try to figure out what it is that's driving your character on a kind of plot level, but also on a character development level. The light bulb means for me is like for the revelation scene. It seems to me that this scene where the character learns something or is revealed to them what their inner flaw is a key scene. Not just in crime stories, for example, where obviously there's a kind of a revelation moment when the murderer is revealed, but in any story when a character learns something. And again, the most important thing to remember, it seems to me, is not just about like the the structure of the story in terms of, aha, the protagonist has his revelation moment here. It could well be that the protagonist doesn't have a revelation moment at all, but the reader does. Yeah, that there's some moment in the story which the story leads to. The narrative is built up to this point of revelation. And when you start to think about the story in these sort of terms, in specific scenes that have a particular role, like this is the revelation scene, then it helps you a lot in structuring a story and planning the story. Now, to return briefly to this idea of the plot points and the pinch points, it seems also that there are good places for certain types of scene. And this important scene of the revelation, it seems to me, having looked at many, many stories and analyzed many also with our tool, that the midpoint, the central pivotal point in the story is a really good point where the character can maybe first recognize the inner problem. And the later, perhaps, the sort of before the end of Act 2, if you work in act structure like this, then the full sort of revelation can come, like where they realize the mistakes that they've made in the past and maybe try to do things better. And again, maybe it's not about the character, the protagonist having these moments, but it's maybe about the reader having these moments when they recognize something in themselves. Now, what I like to do is focus on the reader, on the reader's emotional journey, and that means that I prefer to not just look at like plot points and pinch points, but to look at like the emotions that readers should be experiencing at any stage in the narrative. And having looked at many, many stories of different genres and different types and different cultures also, I found, well, I've got this sort of hypothesis that there's a sort of a rough kind of emotional sort of journey that covers many, many different types of stories. And that is that it sort of starts off with a bit of curiosity, where they're not really emotionally in the story yet. It's not, the hook hasn't really been there yet, but there maybe they were curious enough to open the book and read the first page, and then you get to these moments of which the hook them in, or that the fun games moments, also the wonder and the grief. If you've got a happy end, then you want somewhere before a happy end, you want them to feel really sad and feel grief, in order because you can't really feel happiness if you don't know the opposite. And if it's a terribly sad ending in your book, then it's a good idea to have a very, very happy moment as a contrast moment beforehand. So this is not like obviously a complete template, but a reminder that it's always a good thing to think about the reader's emotions.